So Rudy Gay is a Drapes guy. Yes, no doubt about it.
The conversation continues here with our NBA insider for The Athletic and, of course, the Drive guys, Anthony Slater. Slates, thanks for joining us. We were just talking about Rudy Gay, who, was here during a very tumultuous Kings period. What was it, 18 years? What are your thoughts on Rudy Gay's career, Anthony?
I actually covered the final days of Rudy Gays' career. He was in the Warriors camp last year. And trying to make that roster, although it's just they for money purposes, he kind of knew he wasn't going to, but he was like, they loved the veteran presence. He really turned into a really beloved locker room guy. I know he was loved in San Antonio. I remember at one point, it was late in camp. I know he just retired today, but he knew his NBA career literally might be, 3 days away from ending. And he kind of talked about the trade out of Sacramento and kind of that pivot point of his career with the Toronto situation and everything. And, I think there's a little level of regret from him that there wasn't more considering, where it was, even in those early days in Memphis. Really high level talent. But he kind of morphed into a four. I honestly think if you start his career like a decade later, he fits the modern league. Like his prime would have really fit in this more like pace and space era, like 6'9" wing who could really shoot it. I think he was probably a little bit, ahead of his time.
Wow.
Yeah. I agree. Anthony Slater here from The Athletic joining Slates. Kings got their first win last night. I know it wasn't pretty at times, but a win is a win. And one thing I love, and people talk about the fit with DeMar DeRozan, seems like DeMar is being DeMar in his time in Sacramento so far. What are you seeing from him?
He's going to get his shots up. You mentioned it last night. Sometimes ugly is his style of play, right? That first half was much more in the mud than the third quarter was. The third quarter was probably the best quarter of the season, but DeMar DeRozan had them winning at halftime because he gets the line 10 times in the first half. He kind of hit that fadeaway, right at the end of the half. He can drag them through those ugly moments and make it so while the quarter might not have felt pretty, hey, you're up. You're up. What were they up at half? 7, 8, something like that. And that's where his value is. At least 23 points in 3 straight games to start. It does not feel like he's exploding onto the scene or he's having these huge nights, but it's just workman-like points. There's a reason he's top whatever he is all time in scoring. He's just going to kind of figure out a way to get you points when you need them.
Anthony Slater joining us. Slates, if the bench continues to be somewhat spotty the rest of the way, how far could the top 6 of the Kings carry this team?
We'll see. I would say one of the more encouraging developments of the first 3 games is Kevin Huerter kind of looks like himself.
Yeah.
2 weeks ago, we didn't even know would he be in the rotation? When really will we see him? Before he got injured last year, he was struggling. It seems like he's a confidence type player, and you're talking about a shooter coming off a bad season and also coming off major surgery on the labrum. I didn't know how he was going to look, and last night a few threes, he kind of had a little pump and floater at a big moment. I think how he looks deepens their rotation. Again, I know what you're saying, the bench hasn't looked that great, but I think Trey Lyles will kind of get his legs under him. I think part of putting Kevin Huerter in the starting lineup was a motivation tactic for Keon Ellis, who I didn't think had that great of a preseason. And then he obviously gets the DMP, and it looked like it woke him up a little bit. I thought he had a little bit more juice last night. And, if that can be him, if he can kind of get back into his profile as a high-energy defender, they start to look a little bit deeper. But, how far will that top 6 take them? I think that's going to depend on how well they can defend against better teams, and they just got to win some of these close games. They're 1-2 right now. I feel like they played pretty well in all 3 games, but you lose down the stretch in LA, and I thought they probably should have won that game opening night, and they just didn't find a way to get over the finish line. Those are the ones you got to win if you're going to be near 50 wins and in the playoffs.
Hey, Anthony, when I talked earlier about Keegan Murray and just his development, into being more than a scorer, can he impact the game in other ways? Has he reached that point where he doesn't have to go out there and score 18 or 20? And is that okay for this Kings team?
Yeah, he has. I would say he's impressed me as a defender in his last season and a half, and I'm probably a little bit more down on his like long-term offense, right? Like as a rookie, he had over 200 threes, 41%. Like he hasn't been quite as much of a sniper since then, but he's like completely transformed to who I ever thought he could be defensively. I mean, and I remember early in his second year, there was a game in the Bay where he guarded Steph Curry, and he guarded him well, and the coaching staff was really encouraged. And that was like kind of the night it flipped, where they were like, no, like, we think he can kind of not necessarily be their perimeter stopper, but they give him huge assignments. So when you're talking about impacting the game without scoring, I mean, like, you know, he's going to, on most nights, get the most important defensive assignment. I thought last night he had a couple, like, mid-post touches. One I remember coming out of a timeout when they were struggling a little bit, and it seemed designed. They got him in the post. He hit a little, like, 17-foot fadeaway over a smaller defender. I like the way they're using him a little bit more. I would assume working under DeRozan, while it's going to hurt his stats, his offensive stats this season, it probably will help him learn some of those tricks as a bit, you know, like kind of a wing scorer that maybe he can implement. I don't know. Maybe DeRozan's already helped his mid-post game because I thought it looked pretty good last night. He's always going to space the floor well, where like the defenses are in their scouting reports are told, hey, dude, don't leave him wide open. That always helps an offense. Even if you take 0 threes for a quarter, the fact that a defender has to stay on you is important. So he's a really good two-way player that we'll still see his ceiling. I think for him to get where the Kings believe he can get and where Kings fans should want him to get, he needs to get back like as a pure 40% high-volume three-point shooter that's really knocked down, and we'll see. I mean, that's kind of faded a little bit the last couple of years, but I still think it's in there.
Catching up with Anthony Slater here. Drive guys, as you said, some of those close games, if you want to win 50 games, you got to win those games. Wouldn't that also apply to the upcoming schedule, Anthony? And I know you never know how it's going to play out, but coming up here, you're at Utah, at Atlanta, at Toronto, at Miami. You come home to play Toronto again. You got to take advantage of this soft spot in the schedule, right?
That's what they didn't do last year, right?
Yeah.
You know, I remember they also Washington last year. That was one of their worst ones. Like even, I mean, you mentioned it. You would assume preseason that Miami is like the toughest team on that stretch. They've been kind of rough a little bit. I mean, that's Jimmy Butler situation looming over them. So it's a very winnable stretch, and it's tough to say, hey, you're about to go on a 4-game road trip where the first of that game is like a tough back-to-back where you're flying to Salt Lake City, but like you got to win this game tonight. You know, I've seen Portland in person already, and I've seen Utah in person. Like, I think those are the two worst teams in the West. Take care of business. You know, they did it last night. I do think, considering last time we talked, it was coming off that preseason where they looked a little shaky. I like the energy level and the effort level in the first 3 games, even though they're 1 and 2. But that has to translate to a back-to-back. You need to kind of be 2 and 2 coming out of this, and then probably go 2 and 1 on the rest of the road trip. Like, I feel like a 3 and 1 road trip is like reasonable to expect for a team that is at the arc they're at and talking the way they're talking, believing, you know, the type of team they should be. Like, you know, like bank some of these wins early in the season, because, you know, you get this great stretch now, but you know what that means? I mean, there's going to be a stretch of like tough game. What's after that? I believe it's like it's a real tough stretch of schedule.
Yeah, you got some tough games. Clippers, who are playing better. OKC is in that mix coming up. Then you got Minnesota right before things. So, yeah, things definitely get a little bit tougher. Slates, when you look at, you know, what this team needs, you know, we saw them go against Minnesota, lengthy team. Lakers, long team. How do they address their lack of length, and how do they attack that? I got to think Monty is aware and scouring what's out there. What do you think how they address that going forward?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough to do at this point of the calendar because, look, they can do stuff they've done in the past, like, oh, you know, they got Kessler Edwards off the scrap heap. They tried KZ Okpala, you know. They just went veteran free agency hunting with Doug McDermott because McDaniels didn't really work out in preseason. But the truth is, on the cheap, on the scrap heap free agency or fringe type trades, like, that's not going to change the equation against the Lakers team. You know, these are mostly guys that aren't going to be in your rotation. Kessler Edwards, yeah, he's 6'8" and long and a theoretical defender. Like, he's not going to play over DeMar DeRozan in crunch time. He's not going to play over Malik Monk. So the reality is, like, those guys collectively, which is just kind of a smaller skilled offensive group, like, they have to win with energy. You know, Malik Monk's got to take the occasional charge. DeAaron Fox, you're going to have to ask a lot of them on both ends. He's just going to have to be a great defender this season while also, shouldering an offensive load. Maybe because DeRozan is here, he doesn't have to shoulder as much of an offensive load. He can be kind of a more higher energy defender. But like, this is the core. This is the team. These are the players that are going to play crunch time in most of these games when these games are decided. And then as far as your bigger picture question, that's more trade deadline, maybe in January. This is complete speculation, but if Herter looks good, can you flip a Herter for like a Cam Johnson, a Dorian Finney-Smith? Does that make sense? That to me, more January, February is when you can maybe get a bigger picture piece in that can maybe help with the length problem.
Okay, Anthony, we're about a week into the season. I know you've already shared a few observations here, but what stood out to you in the Western Conference so far in this very, very, very young season?
I went to Thunder Nuggets on that Thursday opening night. Thunder look good right now. I mean, I know this isn't like breaking news, like, hey, Thunder probably going to win the most games in the West, but they went in there, no Hartenstein yet, no Jalen Williams, the big. They had no backup center going against Jokic, and I was even talking to Thunder people pregame, and they're like, this could be really tough. We think Denver's going to come out motivated. If Chet gets in foul trouble, we don't have anyone to guard Jokic. And then Chet outplayed Jokic. Russell Westbrook and that Denver bench was rough, and the Thunder blew them out in Denver, and then the Thunder, blown out two other teams since then. They just, to me, look like the runaway West favorite in the regular season at least. And then the flip side of that is Denver looks shaky right now. And I think that's a big deal in the West. If Denver is as down, remember 2 years ago, there was kind of like mini dynasty talk coming out of that title they had, which I think we all at the time were like, let's slow that down. But I am surprised at how much it has eroded since then, and how concerned I think rightly we should be about pretty much everyone in their rotation beyond Jokic. I mean, he's going to be Jokic, but Murray struggles. Michael Porter's not shooting it that well and feels a little overpaid. In the bench, they've lost Caldwell Pope, they lost Bruce Brown, all that. So I don't know. Those are two observations that we could keep going down the list if you want.
Yeah. Anybody surprising you out there, team wise? Anybody playing better? Maybe the Lakers or
the Warriors?
Warriors? What?
Yeah, I mean, Warriors look good, but, they blew out who I just told you I thought were the two worst teams in the West, right? Portland, Utah. Now the Kings got to complete that blowout tonight. But I do like the Warriors' depth. I've been more impressed with them through, they were 6-0 in the preseason. Like, I think they showed a lot of that. Now that depth's about to be tested. Steph Curry and DeAnthony Melton missing at least 2 games. Andrew Wiggins out tonight. And they're playing Pelicans tonight and tomorrow, both at home. I want to see the Pelicans too, because they just lost in Portland. Like, they're a team that it feels like they could swing upwards towards a 4 seed type or down towards 11. So it's still so early in the season. You mentioned the Lakers. I would say this about the Lakers. They clearly were out on Darvin Ham last year, right? Yeah. Like LeBron was, AD was. And that impacted it. It feels like how hard they played, how much they were, committed to like game plan, scheme, and all that. And we'll see how good of a coach JJ Redick is over the long term. But he's got buy-in right now. They're playing hard. They look more together and into it. Obviously, they beat the Kings. They lost last night to Phoenix, but 3-1, and it feels like a sustainable 3-1, and it does feel like a much healthier situation there in LA, and that's a big deal in the West. As long as they stay healthy. AD also looks like he's in great shape right now.
Yeah. Anthony, I just have one more for you. DeAaron Fox broke the 10,000 point mark last night. He's only the 5th guy to score that many with the Kings. How much will his reputation as a top guard in the NBA, how much will that hinge on how good this team ends up being? Yeah,
I mean, that's everything. Think about, let's just use another example. Trae Young. Remember when they went to the East Finals?
Yeah.
I think it was like that COVID year. They broke through. He had that playoff moment against the Knicks where it was like right when crowds were being allowed back in. It was like such a great sporting event to watch. Like he was, kind of chirping at Spike Lee. Like that's when he elevated to like, oh man, Trae Young's one of the next big stars in the league. Everybody was talking about him. He suddenly became more marketable, and you thought he was about to take off. And then they've disappointed the last couple of years, and all we've been talking about is the bad fit with DeJounte Murray, all that, because they're not winning. And that's what it is in this league. When you have big playoff moments, when you show up on that stage, that's when you go to the next level. It's why Anthony Edwards just went to the next level. He took the Wolves all the way to the West Finals, but it's also why he didn't take that next step, because he kind of disappointed in the West Finals. So everything reputationally kind of hinges on winning at the highest stage when everybody's watching. And I will say one thing about DeAaron Fox. I thought he impressed a lot of people with that first round series against the Warriors. I know they lost that series, but he was really good in it. Him and Monk, but particularly him. And I remember even the Warriors coming out of that talking about how much of like a winning playoff type player he was. He broke his finger. That's the tip of his finger late. Maybe that series is different. So I think he's built for the playoffs. But you got to be in the playoffs, number one, and then you got to advance to deeper rounds to go from just kind of a fun regular season player to that next level of star.
Hey, Slate's last one for me, man. I'm gonna go out east. Sixers fined $100,000 for comments about Joel Embiid. Like, I don't know what's happening out there. I know Paul George got banged up in the preseason. I know Joel Embiid is dealing with what he's dealing with, but this is not a good start for this Sixers team. Like, should we not even buy in on all the moves they made, and could they be threats in the East?
I mean, I buy in if you can guarantee me like Joel Embiid and Paul George are there for 35 minutes on a nightly basis, and really like that they're there in the playoffs, which Embiid has really struggled with over his career. And Paul George played 70-something games last year. Like, he's been healthy. His was just, we saw it in preseason. He just hyperextended his knee. He should be back soon, so I'm not too worried about him as far as like what his current injuries. The Embiid one's weird because part of the reason they got fined is because they came out publicly and were like, he may never play back-to-back again. And the NBA is fining them because they feel like that's bad messaging. They're really trying to, especially with this new TV deal coming in, like they're trying to curb the idea that, basketball players just sit because they need rest, right? They want it to be a legitimate injury. They don't want the Sixers coming out and saying, hey, in March he's going to sit a game. We don't even know why. He's just going to sit. But it also speaks to, like, we should all have questions about his durability. If he is healthy on any particular night, he can score 50 and take over a game. But we all know what the playoffs is. It's 2 straight months of you got to play 41 minutes. Remember that Knicks series they played last year?
Oh,
that went 7. Like that was a series of attrition, and you saw it with the Knicks as the playoffs went on. Bodies started going down. Brunson was just kind of run ragged, and they ended up losing. So to answer your question, I'm not buying in that like Joel Embiid is going to have a marathon playoffs where he's, ready for the entire thing. Even if he might have a 50-point night, sprinkled in there. So I'd be concerned.
Anthony Slater, read all about it in The Athletic. Great NBA coverage. He's with us every week during the season. Thanks, Anthony. We'll talk to you soon.
All right, fellas.
Yeah, we appreciate it.